Welcome to presentation 15, looking at the Gospel written by John. Let's just look back at the previous presentation for a moment or two. Jesus made some amazing statements. For example, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself, and will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I'm going, you cannot come. The disciples would be puzzled. So he's preparing his followers for what lay ahead. Having made these statements, stirred their interest, challenged their minds, he's now working it through. Of course, there was confusion in their minds. Questions racing through their minds, and they voice some of the questions. And chapter 14 starts to look at the answers that Jesus gave. In summary, Jesus said he's going away and will come back for his followers. He's preparing a place for them so that they can join him. He states they know the way to the place where he's going. They protest they don't know where he's going or the way to get there. And then Jesus says that he is the way and the truth and the life, stressing he's the only way to God the Father. He's preparing his friends for what was going to happen. And he's telling them, once it's all over, he'll return. Resurrection. Inevitably, they couldn't really understand that. Then they'll all be together again for a while. But his death and resurrection open the door to access to God. It's a deeper meaning. God has a purpose in all of this. And Jesus, through his death and resurrection, is the only access to God. The things that we tend to do, we make religious ritual and performance. Well, they can't bring us to God. Sadly, they're all over the place. Self-effort can't bring us to God. And that, if we think about it, is the basis of almost every religion. But within Christianity, sadly, the view has come that if we accept certain cognitive beliefs, believe A, believe B, believe C, the ABC of the gospel, sign here, you're in, you've got your meal ticket for heaven. That doesn't work either. Jesus is taking it to a much deeper level. He says he's the way. Now that indicates that it's possible to get to know God now in this life through Jesus. He's the truth. The idea of truth today is a pretty flexible notion in modern Western societies, sadly. But Jesus, in him, is absolute objective truth, that which fits the evidence perfectly, and it's all vested in him, in what he said, what he did, who he is. And the life? He opens the doors so that we can live our lives as God really intended them. Now that's a real life. It's not restrictive, it's not negative, it's liberating. That's what Jesus can bring to us and give to us. He came as God entering humanity. God entered our humanity in the life of a human being. We call him Jesus. And towards the end of our lives, when we move from this planet, the process of getting to know God will be completed and will be with him forever. That's the picture he's painting. As a human being, he was leaving this world. His resurrection would follow his death, yes, and that gives us a kind of model that there is life beyond death, beyond the grave. Great hope, great future. But the resurrection is God's confirmation. It gives the evidence that Jesus is who he claimed to be, God who entered our humanity. And Jesus promises the Holy Spirit as the guarantee of his presence all the time in the future. Now, the evidence we are his followers, Jesus touches upon that. We obey what he's saying. And we live a lifestyle which is directed for the benefit of others. Positive, wholesome living. What a wonderful picture. How does this work out in life? Well, it centers on living in a relationship with God. But when we do that, and when we live our lives for the benefit of others in a strange and almost irrational way, we face reactions from others. Sometimes it's persecution or worse. That's the themes that we're going to be looking at, but we're going to focus in this presentation particularly on the left-hand one. In the following presentation we'll look at the right. Living in a relationship with God. So with that in mind, let's move into chapter 15. Reading the first 17 verses. Jesus said, I am the true vine, my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so to be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, and I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself, it must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. He goes on, I am the vine, you are the branches. Spells it out. If you remain in me, and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire and burned. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourself to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. Ponder for a moment. We want to remain in God's love. We do what Jesus says. That just opens the door. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I have learned from my Father I have made known to you. As a human being, he was learning from God, and he passed it on. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command, love each other. Anything we need to fulfill his commands, he will give it. We just need to ask for his help. Now, we looked at it overall here. I want to focus down on the 3 paragraphs separately in some detail. There's the first paragraph, familiar words. Now this is a kind of step-by-step expansion of what Jesus has already said. He's building up a picture. He doesn't give it in a kind of logical way that we would like in a textbook. He's developing our thinking. He's developing our ideas. He's building it step by step, adding on new layers, adding on new levels. In the previous chapter he says that on that day, perhaps the day when they meet the resurrected Jesus, you will realize that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. Now that's mind-blowing. Now he's building on that statement and trying to explain it and amplify it. Goes back to an Old Testament picture, this, the idea of the vine. Comes in several places, but here's one from Isaiah. The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel, and the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. But it fell apart. A bit later, Jeremiah said that. God speaking, I have planted you like a choice vine of sound and reliable stock. How then did you turn against me into a corrupt wild vine? And Jeremiah warned the people then that the nation would be wiped out and overrun by the Babylonians because of what they'd done. They had not remained in relationship with their Maker. And the same was going to happen again, but even on a worse scale. Jesus is the genuine vine, and we are the vine branches. He's developed, taken the picture one step further. Now the branches, if you think about it, in any plant or tree, they have no life without being attached to the vine stem. And they can't bear fruit if they're detached from the vine stem. It's a picture that's got great depth and meaning for us. I use the word genuine because the word true there carries that meaning. Clean and prunes. I put alongside the words in the original, but I've done it as to prune and to clean, so we get the same picture of speech. They're related. There's almost a play on words here. Jesus presents God the Father as a gardener who's going to prune and develop the branches of the vine. That's the followers of Jesus, so that they can bear fruit. We have to look at what that means. If we go back to the past, into the Isaiah Jeremiah pictures, and other Old Testament scriptures as well, the nation of Israel as God's people, they failed to produce the fruit. They were given chance after chance after chance. They were restored after the Babylonian exile and given yet another chance. With the coming of Jesus, they were given their final chance. Failing to produce the fruit, they're cut off. And the people of Israel, this has got important messages for us today, can be restored, but only by accepting Jesus as their Messiah. Now, I've quoted a passage from the New Testament. Paul deals with the whole issue of the future of Israel. And a lot of what goes on and said today contradicts what Paul teaches. There's the verse. In this way all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion, he will turn godlessness away from Jacob, and this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. You see, it's too easy just to rip out of the context the statement, all Israel will be saved. If you look at the original, it's absolutely crystal clear what Paul is saying. This is how all Israel will be saved. It's the only way Israel can be saved. And in the original, there wouldn't be commas or colons. And Paul quotes from the Old Testament. The deliverer will come from Zion. That's Jesus. He will turn godlessness away from Jacob, from the people of God, what Jesus did. This is my covenant with them. This is what I'm doing for them. When I take away their sins. What did Jesus do when he died on the cross? He died to take away the sins of humanity, to break the bondage of sin so that we can be set free. And it's only when the people of Israel, the Jewish people, accept Jesus that they can be rescued, which is the true meaning of saved. We've got to read it in context according to what the original language actually says, but modern translations in English captured it well. You're already clean because of the word I've spoken to you. You see, we hear what Jesus is saying and we respond to it. As it's the answer for the Jewish people, it's the answer for everybody throughout the world. And the followers of Jesus then, that inner group, they had heard Jesus. They had responded. They're clean. We need to look at that idea of cleanness and tie it into fruitfulness. The word does not imply moral perfection, but it does imply spiritual health. Now we need spiritual health in order to live quality lives. Jesus-like living, living the Jesus way. And inevitably that will attract others to Jesus. So we have spiritual reproduction. And that, of course, relates to bearing fruit, which carries the seeds for others that will grow. That's where it ties in with fruit. The source of the cleanness, spiritual health. We need this cleanness, spiritual health to allow the power of Jesus to flow for the production of fruit. And it's utterly dependent on relationship, in the same way as the fruit-bearing stem must be attached to and draw its life from the main stem of any plant. So we have to draw our spiritual strength from Jesus, our relationship with him. When we respond to him, we start on the road of spiritual health. We're now in a position where we can bear fruit and there can be spiritual reproduction, but it's quality living that's the central feature of fruit. Think of what Paul spoke about with the fruit of the Spirit. Everyone relates to quality living. Going back to chapter 14, I am in my Father. There's a complete unity of Father and Son. God entered our humanity and limited himself by choice within a human frame with the limitations of a human being. But there's complete unity between Jesus and God the Father. But this is mind-blowing. You are in me, says Jesus, and I am in you. There's a picture here of complete unity of Jesus and his followers, an identity of thinking, nature, character, purpose, lifestyle. That's mind-blowing. Absolutely staggering. It's probably worth taking that verse 20, writing it out, pinning it up somewhere where you can see it, so that you just keep thinking about it. It is so mind-blowing. And all of this is worked out in chapter 15, the first 17 verses, in this metaphor of the vineyard, the picture of the vines, their care. The purpose of their existence is to bear fruit. the purpose of our existence is to live for other people. And if we all did that, life would just simply be wonderful on this planet. But in practice, sadly and tragically, we live for what we want, what we decide. Sometimes it's good, sometimes not so good. But we need to learn the Jesus way, where he lived his entire life for the benefit of others, and indeed his entire grim death for the benefit of humanity. Remaining in Jesus? We're often told we've got to remain in Jesus. Now, what does this really mean? Now, first of all, we've got to recognize it's a command. It's not an optional extra. Not just a good idea. It's a command. But there's something hidden behind it. The original language has many more tenses than we've got in English. And the tense here implies a conscious decision. We don't ooze our way into this. We decide, I want to live the Jesus way, and I want to live depending on him. We depend on him by asking for his help and listening to what he says. Now that starts by really knowing our New Testament, the Gospels, inside out. All the things that Jesus said. And there are some versions of the Bible where all the sayings of Jesus, where he spoke himself, are in red print, so you can pick them out easily. We've got to actually do what he said. Then we've got to learn to listen to what he's saying now by his Spirit. Now that word of remaining carries a meaning of a continuing a relationship. It's not the kind of relationship when the chips are down and things are tough, we say, I'm stuck, Lord, help me. It's a continuing relationship all the time. It's a mindset, a way of thinking, an attitude, a thought form. No matter who we meet, where we go, what we're doing, good, bad, or indifferent. Continuing relationship. It's conditional. But it is mind-blowing because it says, I in you. God will become an integral part of our life. Let me say it slightly differently. God will become an integral part of your life. Now perhaps in all of this is a logical sequence. Jesus speaks to us, uses the word word. We listen and respond. Remember, the word belief and faith are words of response, not intellectual words. Practical response. And a relationship is established. We're listening to what Jesus is saying. Now we can see it by just simply reading the New Testament. And the fruit of that relationship, because a relationship develops a character and nature of its own, given time, it's a new life quality and it's characterized by love. Remember, love is not an emotional word. Love means our agenda is the benefit of the other person, no matter who they are or what they've done to us. That has an impact. It always has an impact. History shows it. But if we're going to have an impact, if we're going to live this new life quality, we've got to have this dependent relationship and we've got to keep building it. It's critical for fruitfulness. Critical. That's the point that Jesus is making. Now let's move on to the second section. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it'll be done for you. That's a conditional before we ask. If you remain in me. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourself to be my disciples. When we live the Jesus way, we bring glory to God. It's visible. Other people can see it. Now, this whole stretch, the you is plural. So he's talking about a community. That's the direction of thinking. And you can't tell, but in the original language, to emphasize a word, they would place it at a specific place in the sentence, beginning or end usually. It's emphatic there. We in English would say, I am the vine, you are the branches. That's how we emphasize it. And the word for words there always means spoken words. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, what I say to you, you do it. You follow it. You build your life upon it. Remaining in Jesus. You see, in that sentence, it actually defines what's meant. Total dependence on Jesus. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If we're not remaining in Jesus, we're apart from him. If we are remaining in Jesus, we're depending totally on him, in the same way as a branch depends totally on the life-giving sap that comes up through the main stem. And there's a goal in all of this. You bear much fruit, showing yourself to be my disciples. It says in the original, you will be, to me, disciples. Those who are learning from me. If you're learning from me, your life quality will show it, bearing much fruit. You see, the evidence of belonging to Jesus, doing what he says, and living a life reflecting his quality. And the first leads to the second. And we can always ask for his help at any stage. We've got to learn to listen. We've got to learn to look at what he said in the New Testament. And we've got to do it. And he's there to help us. We've committed ourselves to him. He's opened the door through his life, death, and resurrection to receive his life, his enabling, his power to live the Jesus way. Let's expand a little bit further. There's a sequence of thought. Total dependence on Jesus leads to fruit. Fruit is quality living. Quality living makes an impact. If we don't depend on Jesus, we lose out on the quality living, and spiritual effectiveness starts to disappear. Stop for a minute and just ponder the church in the West. We've got to admit it, with all the decline, there's an awful lot of spiritual ineffectiveness flying around. Churches closing, groups struggling, reputations shattered and shredded through the media. You see, we've lost the quality of living. Our reputation is now up for grabs. It's been undermined. Spiritual effectiveness starts to disappear. We're withering. It's hard to say, but we're effectively useless. And the picture is very clear. Going on this way, the church in the West in a few decades will be a tiny, tiny, tiny minority, often trampled on and persecuted by the majority in society who are pursuing a different agenda. You see, the branch cut off from the stem is effectively dead, and it's our decision. We want to remain following Jesus and drawing from him our spiritual life. We won't be fruitful unless we do it. Do we want to be cast on a spiritual scrap heap? As I look around and see congregations disappearing, as I see church closures and mergers, is that part of being cast on a spiritual scrap heap? It's a frightening picture. You see, when we're depending on Jesus, we do what Jesus wants. Now, we've got to know what he wants, and we've got to take a decision that we're going to find out by reading what he said in the Gospels and by listening to what he says by the Spirit. His resources are there for us if we just ask for them, but we've got to want to do what he says. And glory will come to God in our lifestyle. It's not some blinding light from heaven. That's not revival. We all want revival. The answers are here in this chapter. Others then will see we're following Jesus and we will make an impact. So the challenge to us today is, do we want to be effective? And so many of us are longing for it. We do what Jesus says. Now the final stretch. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I've kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I've told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I've called you friends, for everything that I've learned from my Father I've made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. Now, just reading that through again, certain words stand out. 9 times. Remaining's there. Friends or servants. Commands. And joy. We're going to look at these key words, and that one that's caused so many problems. So let's look at some of these key words. I'll put them up in the form of a table. Let's remember what the word in the original language means. In the original language there are 4 words that can be translated into English as love. This one has no emotional content. It's a word of response. It's a word of action, making it our priority to seek the benefit of the other person, no matter what the cost to ourselves may be, or indeed what they've done to us. That's the true meaning of the word. Total dependence, we've seen that already. Commands, it's not authoritative commands of some dictator. The word carries the idea of instructions or directions. Jesus shows us what to do. It's in the New Testament. The Holy Spirit will show us more. A slave is the correct translation of the original, but we don't have slaves so much in our modern society today. A slave in those days, a person owned by someone else with no rights whatsoever. That's not the way that Jesus is calling people to follow him. That's the way he's calling them to follow them. We can have a warm relationship with Jesus. That's what he wants. That word, a deep inner satisfaction, it's often connected with inner peace. Doesn't matter what life throws at you, you can cope. The word choose. If you go through the whole of the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, but everywhere, and just look up the use of that word each time it comes, God's choice is always for a task. Now, there are other uses of choice in different contexts, but when it comes to God's choice, not a choice as to who's going to go get their meal ticket to heaven or not. That's not taught in the Bible. It's a choice for a task that He's got for you or me to do. He made us, He can equip us, and He knows what He wants us to do, which is the best for us. That's the concept of choice in the biblical sense. Back to the text. Just summarizing the use of the word. Love is the totally central characteristic of God. It's what makes God God. He lives for the benefit of others, human beings, the whole created universe. But if we're going to experience God's love in Jesus, we've got to do what He says. We build our own religion, our own thinking, our own understanding. We kind of cut ourselves off from it. And that generates joy, because He knows the best in life for us, and He only has it for us, and that's where joy comes in. That's the ultimate expression of love. And Jesus did it for humanity. But there's the command, there's the instruction. If we all did that, think of the transformation. Remain is a word of relationship. We depend on Jesus totally. On our own, we'll simply fail to produce the fruit of Christ-like lifestyle. We're not strong enough, good enough, able enough to do it. You want it? Follow His directions and ask for His help. That's what Jesus did. Limited within the human flesh of a human being, He obeyed God. And we're instructed to do exactly. Jesus will direct us. But the central instruction is to love one another. Slave or friend? That's not what we are in relationship to God or Jesus. That's the picture Jesus gives us, a warm friendship with sharing. It's never abject slavery or fear. And how often in religion there is generated a fear of God, which is terror. As if God is pacing up and down, waiting to point the finger at our every failure and consign us to the misery of hell for eternity. That's not the God of the Bible, and it's not the God that Jesus pictured or lived for at all. Throw it out of your mind. God wants relationship with us through Jesus. That's very different. And God's choice? God's choice is always for a task to be undertaken. Not a destiny, but a task. At the same time, we are given the freedom to choose whether we will obey God's direction and undertake the task. It's never used that way. And here it's typical. Jesus chose His followers, the inner group here, and His followers down through the centuries, that they might go and bear fruit. That's the task that we have to undertake. Fruit that will last, not just coming and going, that it will grow, develop, mature, so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. We can ask for His help at any time in order to achieve that goal, to bear fruit, quality living, the lifestyle of Jesus. But we've got to depend on him. We can't just try our best and think that will do. Won't work. We're not good enough. And when we go and bear fruit, then we're living for the benefit of others, no matter what it costs. That's the picture Jesus is painting here so vividly. And he's chosen us for that task, to enjoy the wonderful experience of Jesus-like living in a society which is so unsympathetic, living for the benefit of others. There are great truths in all of this. You see, it's a complete package that Jesus has for his followers, that he's drawn this wonderful picture here for us. The key words, I'm just going to pick 4 of them. Remember the meaning? The agenda of Jesus always was and is to seek the best for the other person. Indeed, for all humanity. That's his agenda, being willing to go to the cross. God so loved the world that he gave. Obedience is not the abject saluting and obeying blindly like a slave. It's responding to the warm relationship and following the directions of Jesus because he knows better than we do. And we depend on him if we need help to live for others. Ask his help. He will help us. He's there for us. He's given us a model, the father-son relationship, the closest one that could be used. A relationship model for us. He did it. He asks us to do it. And it will lead to deep satisfaction and fulfillment. It's the best kind of life. It's meaningful life. It's radiant life. We've got to rediscover that in our Christian groups. And that's the ultimate goal Jesus has for us. Not the superficial froth that so often joy is pictured as being, but that deep inner satisfaction when we're living for others all the time. Let's put it into practical terms. If we want to be fruitful, if you want to be fruitful, but let's take it as we, because it was written in the plural here. That must become the characteristic of our Christian groups. We've a long way to go in the West today. Indeed, we've got to learn from other parts of the world. And we must follow his directions. Just look at the things we do in our churches and Christian groups today and ask yourself the question, did Jesus instruct this? And we've got to learn that. So often we form our little committees, whatever name we give them. We take our decisions and we ask Jesus to rubber stamp them. That's not what remaining in him is anything to do with. Depending on him totally, his directions. What we do, but how we do it. And that's the ultimate goal. Peace and satisfaction in a life well lived. Now there's an agenda for all our Christian groups. We have a lot of things that we need to put in order today, in the West in particular. We have drifted away from what Jesus has directed us to do. We've lost the central characteristic of love, living for the benefit of others. And too often we're running systems rather than living for Jesus, depending on his resources. It's a complete package. It's an amazing agenda for us. It's a wonderful picture, and there's maybe more to this chapter than even in here. But we've got to recognize it's very different from the pressures in wider society. If you like, it's a counterculture. Living the Jesus way always is a counterculture. Chosen, yes, for a task. The destiny of the followers of Jesus to live the Jesus way. And that's a counterculture. But the brother of Jesus wrote that many years later. Don't you know that friendship with the world means enmity against God? That's totally consistent with what Jesus taught. Living the Jesus way will mean inevitable rejection and persecution, and sometimes it will appear to be completely irrational and illogical. It's happening all over the world, ignored by our media in the West to a large extent. And it's growing bit by bit in the West, but much of that we've brought upon ourselves. But if we live the Jesus way, there will be inevitable rejection and persecution. And that's what Jesus is going to look at next. So the next presentation is going to focus on the rejection and persecution, which is the almost inevitable consequence of our identity with Jesus, he in us, we in him, living the Jesus way before the watching world.